Once upon a time, in a town so close to Akhir you could almost hear its whispers, yet so far away no map could ever find it. There was a problem. This town wasn't rich, nor was it poor, but a heavy silence had fallen over it, a silence born of mistrust. In the bustling marketplace, the scales tipped unfairly. The grocer's thumb added a bit too much weight. The baker's loaf felt a little too light, and a yard of fabric somehow always seemed to shrink by an inch. Promises were made like dandelion seeds, scattered to the wind and forgotten. No one fought or argued out loud. Oh no, it was all smiles and polite nods. But underneath, resentment simmered like a pot left on the fire too long. Everyone felt cheated and everyone was probably right. The trust that holds a community together was crumbling, replaced by suspicion and silent grudges. The air itself felt heavy, not with noise, but with the unspoken weight of dishonesty. Finally, the town's elders couldn't bear the silence any longer. They gathered in the main square, their faces etched with worry. They talked for hours, measuring their words, weighing their options, and debating every possible solution. The sun climbed high, then began its slow descent, and still they had no answer. It seemed the problem was as tangled as a fisherman's net. At last, one of the oldest and wisest among them stood up, his voice raspy from the long discussion. "Friends," he said, "we cannot go on like this. Our town is sick, and the illness is distrust. We need a cure. We need someone who isn't trying to please any one of us, but who can shake up our thinking, someone who can turn our minds upside down just enough to see things clearly again." A murmur of agreement went through the group. "Yes," said another, "someone who can show us the foolishness of our ways." The wise elder stroked his long white beard. "I know just the man," he declared. "Let's call for Nasreddin Hodja." And with that, a ripple of hope, the first in a very long time, spread through the weary group of elders. When Nasreddin Hodja finally arrived, it was in his usual peculiar fashion, riding his donkey, but facing its tail. The sight was so familiar, so iconically Hodja, that everyone in the streets knew who he was instantly. Yet, something was different. A strange quiet hung in the air. Normally, his arrival would be a chaotic celebration. Children would chase after his donkey, their laughter echoing through the alleys. Men would call out jokes, and women would smile from their windows. But not this time. This time, there was only silence. A thick, unnerving silence. Hodja, ever observant, felt the quiet press in on him. He slid off his donkey and looked around at the solemn faces watching him. He muttered to himself, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Well now, this is a peculiar place. It's not heavy with noise, but it's certainly heavy with weight." The elders led him to the center of the town square, where a plush cushion had been laid out for him. Hodja settled onto it, crossing his legs and looking expectantly at the headman. The headman cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "Hodja," he began, his voice heavy with the town's burden, "we have a problem. Cheating scales, crooked promises, short measures, distrust has poisoned our town. We need you to show us a way out of this darkness. We need a solution." Hodja narrowed his eyes, a glint of mischief in them, and stroked his beard thoughtfully. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his wisdom. After a long moment, he spoke. "Very well," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "I will help you, but first you must do something for me. Bring me the single most accurate, most honest, most trustworthy scale in this entire town." The elders looked at each other, a little confused by the request, but they nodded and promised to have it by morning. The next day, a small crowd gathered as the town's most respected merchants brought forward a large brass balance scale. It was polished to a shine, its pans hanging in perfect equilibrium. One by one, people stepped forward to vouch for it. "Hodja, the scale never lies," declared the spice merchant. "I've used it for 20 years, added the goldsmith. "It's as true as the sunrise. There's no cheating with this one, Hodja, we swear it." They all chorused. Hodja stood up and walked slowly around the scale. He squinted at it, tapped its beam, and gently shook its base. He seemed to be examining its very soul. Then, without a word, he walked over to his donkey and untied a heavy burlap sack. He grunted as he dragged it back to the square and dropped it with a heavy thud next to the scale. He turned to the crowd, a playful look on his face. "What's in this sack?" he asked. The crowd murmured, unsure. "Stone," came a voice from the back. "Yes, stone," Hodja confirmed, "but not just any stone. These are special stones, heavy stones." And with that, he reached into the sack and pulled out a large, smooth river stone, placing it gently onto one of the scale's pans. The pan dropped with a loud clang. Then he turned to the other side of the scale. He reached into his deep pockets and started pulling out smaller, flatter stones, one by one. He placed one on the empty pan, then another, and another. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as the pan slowly began to lower. He kept adding stones, his movements deliberate and slow, until the two pans hung perfectly level. The large stone on one side and a pile of small stones on the other. They were in perfect balance. Hodja stepped back and addressed the crowd. "There," he said, "perfectly balanced. Now, who among you is the most honest merchant? The one who has never given a short measure?" A burly butcher, known for his piety, stepped forward. "I have always been fair, Hodja," Hodja smiled. "Excellent. Take this large stone. For 1 week, this will be your only 1 pound weight. Use it for every transaction." Then he turned to the pile of smaller stones. "And who among you," he asked, "is the second most honest merchant?" A baker, a thin and nervous man, reluctantly raised his hand. "Good," Hodja said. "You take these smaller stones. This pile is also 1 pound. Use them for 1 week." The two men took their respective weights, looking utterly bewildered. The crowd began to whisper. What was Hodja's plan? A week passed. The town was buzzing with speculation. Then, as promised, everyone gathered again in the square. Hodja was already there, sitting on his cushion. "Well?" he asked. "Bring back the stones." The butcher came forward, his face red with frustration. "Hodja, this is impossible. This one big stone. It's too heavy for small things, too light for big things. I've lost customers. They say I'm cheating them." Next came the baker, looking even more haggard than before. "And you?" Hodja asked. The baker threw the pile of small stones on the ground. "Hodja, this is a nightmare. Counting these little stones for every loaf of bread, every pastry. Some get lost, some get mixed up. The customers are angry. They think I'm tricking them with a handful of pebbles. This is not a weight, it's a curse." Hodja listened patiently, a slow smile spreading across his face. He let the complaints and frustrations echo through the square. Then he stood up and raised his hands for silence. "You see?" he said, his voice ringing with clarity. "For 1 week, you have both felt what it is like to be on the other side of a suspicious transaction. You, the butcher, felt your customers' mistrust when your weight seemed wrong. And you, the baker, felt their suspicion when your measure was complicated and confusing." He paused, letting his words sink in. The problem was never the scales. The problem was never the weights. The problem was the little bit of doubt you each added to every deal. A thumb on the scale, a handful of flour held back, a promise slightly bent. You thought you were gaining a little, but what you were really losing was trust. And without trust, even a perfect scale is useless. A deep silence fell over the square once more, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy silence of suspicion, but the light, clear silence of understanding. The townspeople looked at each other, not with accusation, but with a shared sense of shame and recognition. For the first time in a long time, they saw their own reflections in their neighbors' eyes. Hodja clapped his hands together. "Now," he declared, "go back to your shops. Use your old scales, use your old weights. But this time, add one new ingredient to every transaction. Honesty. Weigh your goods, and then add a little extra as a measure of goodwill. Make a promise, and then deliver a little more as a token of integrity." From that day on, a change swept through the town. The butcher started adding an extra slice of meat to every order. The baker's loaves seemed to grow a little bigger. The fabric merchant always cut his cloth with a generous hand. The weight of suspicion lifted, replaced by the lightness of fairness and generosity. The silence was broken, not by arguments, but by friendly chatter and laughter once again echoing through the marketplace. And Nasreddin Hodja, his work done, quietly mounted his donkey forwards this time and rode off toward the horizon, leaving behind a town that was not only heavier in goods, but immeasurably richer in trust. Thanks for watching our story today. If you enjoyed this tale of wisdom from Nasreddin Hodja, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that make you think and smile. See you next time.